Level up your LA Kings experience with Vivid Seats Elite Seats. All the on-ice Kings action with even more exclusive access and rewards. Enjoy great seats to the game in Section 103 along with Yamava Club access and parking included with your purchase. Plus, get a free Team LA Kings shop item at the game. Score your Vivid Seats Elite Seats tickets today and earn perks on each purchase from the only leading ticket company with a rewards program. Experience it live with Vivid Seats, the official partner of the LA Kings. Do you know the LA Kings have their own culinary partner? It's Superfood, celebrating 10 years and over 1 million meals served. Since 2020, the Kings have trusted Superfood to fuel their players. Now through Simply Lunch, you can bring that same performance-driven food to your office. Because when people eat better, they work better. Visit mysuperfood.com. That's mysuperfd.com. Or call 213-973-6145. Qualified companies can enjoy a free lunch for up to 10 managers.
You're listening to All the Kings Men, the official podcast of the LA Kings. Now, here's your host, Jesse Cohen.
Welcome back to another episode of All the Kings Men. These are always my favorite episodes of the year. Joining me today, Director of Amateur Scouting Mark Yannetti. How you doing, Mark?
I'm doing well, thanks.
You're laughing at me. These are my favorites.
No, it's nice. As I said, it's flattering.
All right, so we're just going to jump right into it because there's a lot of ground to cover. You're here, you're physically here, which is why we're doing this now, because your schedule, I don't even know what your schedule is at this time of year, but I imagine with the draft in Buffalo, you're flying all over the country.
Yeah, I'm here. I mean, we had some pro stuff, my R&D meetings, then the after the analytic meetings were over, then the amateur meetings, get on a plane, fly home tonight, then fly to Buffalo Sunday.
Jeez.
And then we got Berlin camp, and then
what's Berlin camp?
We have the team. Mr. Anschutz owns the team in Berlin.
Ice
Baron. So they have a camp every year with some of their players, their pros, some prospects maybe for their team in the year to come. So it's it's like a training camp or a tryout camp for Ice Baron non-roster players.
Gotcha. All right, so we'll dive into this year, the 2026 NHL Entry Draft. First question I have is, you have the 17th overall pick. You have 2 picks in the second round. In the last 2 years, you've traded down. The LA Kings prospect pool right now, and I hope this doesn't feel dismissive, it feels like it's long on depth players, but shallow on high ceiling players. Is this the kind of year where maybe you look to trade up rather than down in the first round?
I think this year, yeah. I think you should trade down. In a vacuum. In most years, it's, again, my philosophy. It doesn't mean it's anyone else's. Mm-hmm. I like to trade down. Now, that's been magnified because in these last few years, we've been, we've traded 5 first-round picks. We've had 5 first-round picks. We've only made, we only have 2 right now. We traded Green Tree. We traded picks. In years past, I think we traded 4 out of 7 and then 3 out of 7. So a lot of times too, it's necessity, right? We have a shallow prospect pool. We have no picks because we're trying to win, and so you trade back and you get an extra second. So in the last 3 or 4 years, we've had no seconds, and like we had to trade to get a pick to get George. We had to trade to get a pick to get Shahar. So there's some necessity built into it, as well as it is my philosophy. With Green Tree going out, the only high ceiling prospect. I mean, there'll be some guys that'll exceed, and there's some guys I think are higher ceiling than the pundits. But Henry would probably be the
Bristavich, you mean?
Yeah, he would be the one position player who's got a high ceiling and should reach it. And then you got some goaltenders, but they're a little iffy and a little longer away. So
the reason I ask is that 17 feels like it's not the smack dab in the middle, but it's as close as you can get in a 32-team first round. I think a couple of years ago, I don't remember when Gabe Perreault was drafted, but it felt like he was falling and there was an opportunity to maybe move up and try to get him. But maybe you were a little bit too far back.
No, we traded the pick.
Oh, well, there you go.
So,
oops.
No, Gabe Perreault, it's funny you mentioned that name. He was very well liked by our staff. But no, that was one year we didn't have the pick. I think New York took him 3 spots after what would have been our pick. Okay. I'd have to look back.
But if you're drafting in the mid-20s and a guy drops out of the top 10 into the teens, that feels like a harder lift than if you're at 17 and a guy falls out of the top 10 and all of a sudden you're dealing with the guy with the 13th pick.
Well, yeah.
How expensive is it to move from 17 to 13?
Well, I mean, Yeah, so there's a couple things. At 17, there's some opportunities presented this year, but the odds of a guy falling out of the top 10, I mean, from 17, usually you can't get to 10.
Mm-hmm.
You probably can't get to 11. 12, is it doable? Maybe. It's a second-round pick, usually to move up 2 to 3 spots. So it might be 2 second-round picks. Now you have to start, assigning value. It could be a bridge too far. And if you move up from 17 to 14, you're probably getting the same guy anyway at 17. So if you're at 14 or 13, but rarely do teams move. I mean, if you look back, I want to say, because we've done these movement scenarios last week when I was meeting with the analytics guys, rarely do you move outside the top 10 into the top 10. And then I forget 2 of the teams after top 10 would have no reason to trade with us. I think St. Louis is at 11. And if we were to trade up with St. Louis, they already have 2 other first-round picks and second-round picks. So there's no they don't want 5 picks later. Right. So they're out. And then there was another team that was similar to that. They had I forget who it was, but so now 2 of those teams are out too. So you can't get to 10 and you can't get to 11, and I think it was 13. I forget, but you can't get. So now you're looking at 17 and you've got only 3 picks you can actually move up for. So it's, if someone falls, for sure. I mean, we have a tier. We have a couple tiers, but we have a drop-dead tier of guys that we would move quite a bit for. I'm sure other teams, usually your tiers are, if you make it easy, the top 5 is usually different than any other tier, and then sometimes it's 7, sometimes it's 10. In rare years, it could be 12. So if we got fortunate and someone fell to one of those non-St. Louis team type things, and the team there lost their tier, but our tier was still there, you could possibly do it. And we certainly are ready to move up. There would probably be realistically 1 or 2 guys we would want to move up for, but it's something you have to prepare for, because you won't know. There's no way you can even start processing a deal like that until 8, 9, or 10 happens.
So I've been talking to a bunch of people about the draft, independent scouts. You and I have talked about the independent scouting.
Some of them are great.
Some of them are very, they're all thorough. I'll give them that. Well, most of them are thorough. There's 1 or 2 that aren't. But the one, so I'm pulling up all these different lists, and they have all the rankings, and they're all subtly different. And when I'm going through looking at, potential candidates to ask people about, I'm eliminating goalies and right shot defensemen from my focus list, mainly because the Kings have George Lukinski, Rimpinen, Portillo, and then your NHL level goalies under contract. Are you even thinking about goalies this year?
Yeah. So with our philosophy at one time was not to draft goalies, especially in a tier. The goalie, no matter what happened, if they're in a tier, the goalie would go last. I mean, we had Bernier, Quick, we had Martin Jones. So at one time, as I said, we interviewed Freddie Anderson one time, Roots and I, and he was a guy that we really liked. And he was very respectful, but he didn't understand why we were interviewing him.
Right.
And he's like, I won't come. I'm like, well, if we draft you, and he's like, I already said no to Carolina, and their goaltending depth isn't as good as your goaltending depth. So at one time our goaltending depth was that good that guys would just say, don't bother. I mean, think about that for a second. So within 1 year, we went from that kind of goaltending depth to just Jonathan Quick. And that's a 4 to 5 year rebuild in the best of cases. So you can get lulled into this false sense of security with this massive depth in any position. And then as I said, one move of Martin Jones and Bernier leaving, and now it's just Quick. And you haven't drafted a goalie in the, one goalie in the top 5 rounds in 7 years. So then we scramble and we come up with a plan, and you get Portillo. So you fill the age distribution with Portillo being already through the draft. So he's further ahead in his development path. And then you start filling it in behind with George Sakinski. So I would say, again, people always talk about best player available. You make mistakes when you don't draft the best player available. I agree with that. And you just never know. I mean, again, you have you had Voynov, Martinez, then all of a sudden 2 of them are gone. So it's something you have to be, especially at the goalies. I think you need a conveyor belt type system, like shark's teeth, however you want to say it. Mm-hmm. When one goes off the list, you have one. So would I prioritize a goalie in the first round? No. But would I draft a goalie at the right spot in the draft? Yeah. As I said, it would have to be, all the values would have to align.
Sure.
As I said, all things being equal, we'd probably go in another direction. But if the right goalie was there at the right spot, or the right shot defenseman was there at the right spot, you'd have to be careful about skipping over someone like that for those multitude of reasons.
I've been calling this summer the summer of I don't know, because there's so many, not just with the Kings, but like with the hockey world in general, new CBA, things are changing. Who knows what's going to happen with Russia? Like, it's getting harder and harder to predict what the next few months will bring. One of the changes to the CBA is that now, no matter where you draft a player from, the club that drafts them gets 4 years of bargaining exclusivity. Does that change your approach at all?
It does in some instances. It's a narrow field or a narrow thing, but having, one of the great things about, and we've been fairly successful drafting college guys. One of the great things about drafting those college guys is you have 4 years, and you can. I mean, again, you look at Wooly, Brushevitz, and Jimmy Lombardi. They're all within a year and a half old of each other. Well, one of the guys looks like he's Wooly's 10-year-old brother. So there's so many different, age doesn't matter. It's developmental age. So there's guys in junior hockey that you're like, oh, he's going to need an extra year or 2 years, or, a European, it's nice to have 4 years, and it's nice to have everything be, synergistic. Everything's consistent now. You don't have 2 years for this guy and 4 years for this guy and an indefinite amount of period for this guy. So it opens up your options too, because with those extra 4, that 4 year window now comes the ability for the junior hockey players to go to college. So all of that happening in that same time frame is like a perfect storm for development, and it allows you to be a little more flexible maybe with some of your picks, probably more later in the draft. But I like it. I think it helps. I think it's a big deal actually.
I was stunned at how many players, as I was looking into the draft, how many CHL players are already committed to college next year. And then I watched a little bit of the Memorial Cup. For the full disclosure, for the first time in my life, I paid close attention to the Memorial Cup because it was Chihash and Wooly in that first game. Is the NCAA better than CHL right now?
But the NCAA is always better than the CHL. I mean, no, it is.
I forgot who I was talking to.
No. Like, even diehard Canadian guys. I mean, you can't take a group of mostly 19-year-olds and younger. I mean, you get the three overage, but the youngest player on some college teams is 3 years older than the oldest player on some junior teams. It's not opinion. The NCAA is better than the CHL. I mean, the AHL is better than the CHL. It's strictly age. So in terms of development, it's a really good path because there's a lot of guys that come out of junior and aren't quite ready for the American League. But they certainly don't belong in junior. You go back to Thomas Hickey. The talk is going to be about Brushevitz this year, because they have that one exception rule now. So there's guys that get caught. And again, it's rarely more than one guy per draft, but they get caught in that kind of nebulous, I'm too good for junior. The habits I need to fix don't get fixed in the CHL, but I'm not quite ready for the American League. And if I go there while the habits will get fixed, I won't get my developmental ice time. College is that perfect intermediary. Now, sometimes it's good for a guy who's a 19-year-old to come out of junior. Sometimes it's good for an 18-year-old. I do think the later you come out of junior and go to college, the more it helps you. But I think it's a really good development path for every. I wouldn't even be against a rule that you have to, if you're a CHL player, you have to spend a certain amount of time and then you can go to college. I think the stat was, in the top 20 or 25 NCAA scorers last year there were only 2 rookie CHL players in the top 25. And people had pointed to that, like, well, see how much harder it is. But I think if you looked at the top scoring for first-year players in college hockey, took them all, I want to say like 15 of them were CHL players. So it kind of points to the age difference. In college, you're dealing with 20 to 25-year-olds. With first-year players, you're dealing about 18, 19, and 20. So that shows the strength of the 18 and 19-year-old age group in junior hockey in comparison to each other, and it shows it in comparison to the rest of college hockey.
I know that once a player's drafted, that's kind of out of your hands, right? Like their path is now in development.
In some degree, yeah.
So Jimmy Lombardi, since you brought him up, drafted, I think, 4th round? Fifth round, I believe.
Oh, no, he was their second. We had 2 4th-round picks, him and Harrington. Yep,
plays, I want to say Flint?
Yep.
Committed to Michigan, signs an ELC in the middle of the year, can't go to Michigan anymore. Now is, I don't want to say stuck in juniors, but stuck in juniors until he's eligible to play in the AHL or NHL. I mean, he's always eligible to play in the NHL. But like, I asked one of the independent people about this. Because players can now go from the CHL to the NCAA because of NCAA rule changes, are we likely to see a reduction of drafted players signing entry-level contracts because it would mean they can't play in college anymore?
Yeah, but now you get 4 years.
Right.
Jimmy signed before they kind of had done that. I think you could have made an argument that college would have been good. I think you make an argument that if you sign him, you have full control of his development. Your guys can be with him all the time. Some colleges are great to deal with. Some are less so. Some colleges you have a real foot in the gas with it, and some, they're very standoffish and want limited contact. So the one thing about signing an entry-level contract is you completely control the path and the player for that point. But I would think you'll see more guys going to college and delaying the entry-level contract by a year or 2 now. Both teams and players I think they'll be in agreement that that's a good path for them. The interesting thing will be, because again, it's like the Wild West in college right now. Like you have East Coast League hockey players playing in college and they're pro, but and then you have an entry-level contract guy who's never played pro and he can't go there. So it'll be interesting to see how they sort that out. One of the great things would be if you could sign an entry-level deal, but as long as you haven't played pro hockey, you could go to college. I think that would be a pretty good compromise. But as I said, we'll see it. Those rules are still just in their infancy.
So getting back to this year's draft specifically, last year, as I say this year, we go right back to last year. Last year was Ken Holland's first year as GM, and he was hired, in the offseason. And so he said, I'm going to give Mark autonomy over this draft. But then made a couple of moves that obviously I don't think you were, I'm going to say you weren't consulted on, but it's not like you should have been, right? Like trading Jordan Spence is not a Mark Yannetti decision.
Oh, I said, Ken, my job is to give Ken any information he asks for, whether it's about a pro player, a prospect, or a draft thing.
But let's say you're at the draft or you're prepping for the draft and the 13th overall pick comes to you and says, hey, we'll take 17 and Henry Brustevich, just to throw out a name, to move up to 13, and there's a guy you really, really like at 13.
Have to really, really like him.
Fair enough. But can you do that without, how long is the process of looping Ken Holland in? How much feedback does he have on you trading assets, Kings assets, whether it's roster players, prospects, draft picks, whatever it is? Let's say somebody says, okay, we'll give you our first round pick in the 20s for both of your second rounders. Can you make that move on your own?
Yeah, well, yes, but I don't do anything on my own. There's nothing. The only person in the organization who can do something on their own is Ken, as it should be. But I can have autonomy in the draft. Like last year I had autonomy in the draft. Okay. And Ken had said that beforehand, and I did. But when we decided to move back from 21 to move back to 31 to pick Brustevich, I don't just call
right.
I said, Ken, this is what I'm thinking. At 21, I think we get one of these 2 players. Brustevich was one of them. I said, I think if we move back to the 30s, we still get one of these 2 players. I can't guarantee you which one it is, but based on our predictions, based on our models, it will be one of these 2 players with high certainty. If for some reason it doesn't work and these 2 players aren't there, which is the small percentage, but it is a percentage, these are the 4 players that will be there. This is what it'll cost us to, to move up, or in that case, to move back. We'll be picking up this pick. And if we pick up this pick, it will be one of these 7 players. Shahar was in that group. So then he's, as I said, I give him all that information and he okays it. He, in last year's draft especially, went on the amateur staff's expertise and experience and allowed us, as I said, when he says he gives me autonomy, or someone asks about the autonomy, my autonomy is to bring him any and all situations and then for him to sign off on them. So it would be me more directing information his way and him saying, yeah, that seems good, or I don't have an opinion on that, or you do what you want, or, but he would take in that information, say yes or no. In terms of the draft, he did lean on us, and I said he'd just come back too. I anticipate it will be similar this year. We have not sat down and discussed it at length, but I will bring him if we want to move up from 17. I'll say it's going to cost us X and Y. At 17 we'll get this player. At 13 or 12 we'll get this player, but we'll have to give up this asset, whether it's a prospect, or this asset, whether it's a pick. And if it's this asset, he would go 49 in this year's draft. If it's this pick at 49, it would be one of these 4 players. So as I said, I'm bringing him information. I'm coming up with what we should do, and then he is saying whether I can do it, or whether it seems like a good thing to do, or whether or not.
This next question is pure fantasy land. I want to stress that as hard as I can. Over the last few months, I saw a number of different videos from totally unreputable sources, just people speculating, that said that San Jose, Florida, and Chicago would all be willing to trade their first-round picks. That's 2, 4, and 9. The part of me that loves playing video game hockey and was just constantly trading any player I had on, I'd play again on my Xbox and sign Alex Ovechkin to a 1-year, $10 million contract, and then immediately trade him for a first-round pick just so that I could hoard first-round picks. Is there any part of you, just for the novelty of it, that would love an opportunity to have 3, 4, 5 first-round picks just to see what you could do with it?
No, I don't think I'd want 4 or 5. As I said, don't get me wrong, I'd want 3 top 5 picks, 3 top 10 picks. I mean, if we're in fantasy land.
Yeah.
The problem with having, again, once you get to 3 picks in the first round or more, there's so many things that can go wrong. So, again, since we're playing fantasy, if you take the top 10 picks out, and especially the top 5, the top 5, you rarely see a guy who doesn't make it. You see busts in the top 5, but whatever. But the top 5 and top 10, there's this really high level of certainty. At pick 1, you've got very good odds of picking the best player available. At pick 2, 3, 4, 5, you have really good odds of picking. As soon as you get to 11 or 12, the odds of you picking the best player still available at 11 are slim. If you just look at it objectively, you've got 200 picks behind you, and you're picking at 11 or 12, which is when the draft starts to break and there's other things start to come out. The odds you're going to pick the best, the 11th best player in the draft at 11 are extraordinarily slim. And it goes so on and so on. It's like, Tiger Woods is a lock to win the championship. But if you take the field, you're going to win far more often.
Right.
I'm just saying, so there's so much uncertainty that having multiple picks there would lend itself to more chances not to pick the best players. I don't want to be critical, but Boston going bing, bing, bing.
That's exactly what I was looking at right now, 13 through 15.
But again, the odds of them picking the best players at those spots, because again, DeBrusk he might be at 4 or 5. He's a good player. But you're limiting, you said if you just go by probability and statistics, the chances of you coming out with 11, 12, and 13 are astronomically against you. And then let's just say you do it right. So you got 3 first-round picks. You do it right. They're all coming up for ARB at the same time. They're all coming up for free agency at the same time. So the good news is they all make it. The bad news is you've got this logjam of, again, we see guys getting bigger contracts earlier. So now you've jammed 3 giant contracts onto young guys. And it's okay to jam 1 giant contract onto a young guy when you have it spread out and such. So you have that, and then your age distribution as well. You have this cluster of where it's, I said 2. I would like 2, 2, 2 in drafts. That would be perfect, rather than 6 or 5 in one draft.
You came on to the team. You were hired by the LA Kings under Dean Lombardi. Dean Lombardi had been around for a while, was around as the Kings GM for a while. A very clear pattern of standard operating procedure was established under Dean Lombardi. Everybody knows about it. We've talked about it. Then Rob Blake is the GM for 7 or 8 years. 8 years. And the identity shifted, but not tremendously. There was a very clear, Kings identity. Rob Blake left. Ken Holland comes on, but Jim Hiller stayed as the coach. The system, the 1-3-1 is gone, but the focus is still the same. Jim Hiller is relieved of his duties and DJ Smith comes on. Suddenly the way the team played changed. Does that trickle upwards? Like, going into this draft, are the Kings still operating with the same core organizational philosophy when it comes to onboarding players?
No. And again, there were some similarities with Rob to Dean, but there were more differences in terms of everything we did. Player procurement at the amateur side, player procurement at the pro side, how we did development, how day-to-day operations. It was don't get me wrong, it's the same basic tenet, but there were a multitude of differences between, just interpersonal relationships with Rob and Dean. So, and again, with Ken, in terms of what you see on the amateur side, that takes the longest. The pro side's the easiest. The day-to-day office stuff happens immediately, and the pro stuff happens probably next closest because you can just go get 4 players that play. With Rob, we did change our drafting philosophy, and we did focus on other areas. The funny thing is that you say that is the team style didn't change as much as you would have thought, with the slightly different direction in how the team was going to play, what type of players we're going to value, what type of players they weren't going to value, because the system didn't change nearly as much, and the style of play, defense. I mean, we've been lauded for defensive play and criticized for defensive play since 2007. So that didn't change as much, which is kind of strange. And you have this influx of slightly different style of players. So sometimes you think things are going to change more drastically than they do. With Ken, it's, as I said, it's on my side, it's a whole lot harder because you need about 4 or 5 years to know, and not to know, but to change the direction if you are going to make a change. So with Rob, you started to see a little bit different type of player, and such like that. But as I said, they did play differently at the end of this year, and you see that too. There's, when you see a coaching change in the middle of the year, you see this bump that happens. Like, you could get a bump like Buffalo, but usually you get a nice, exciting bump. There's a little bit different energy around the team, a slight change in tactics, a slight change in the way guys play. Definitely a change in the way guys are used and deployed. And we'll see going forward.
Daryl Sutter was only, heavy air quotes, the coach for 5.5 years, 6 years, something like that, which is, I think, the average shelf life of an NHL coach these days. But when you have, Terry Murray, Daryl Sutter, John Stevens obviously did, but then Todd McClellan, Jim Miller, there's a even though everything can change in an instant, there's the assumption of longevity. You go like, okay, Rob Blake's the general manager. Who knows how long he'll be the general manager, but it's not likely to change like that. Obviously Ken Holland has the voice, as you say. There's only one person in the organization who can act unilaterally. But if he's, last summer when he came in, Jim Hiller had been there longer. So I looked to Jim Hiller to set the tone. I was like, okay, Ken Holland has the authority, but Jim Hiller has the seniority, has the opinion, the loudest voice in the room, just based on being the one person who's a holdover. Now we're going into a summer where you're the holdover.
There's one voice, and that determines trickle down everything else. I don't think that Hillier would have had the voice because of seniority. He's the voice because he's in the room. So the biggest influence on day-to-day culture or structure or attitude are the 23 players and the but the head coach in that room because of circumstance, because of proximity. Ken can have a huge effect on the whole organization. Jim can have an effect on the team. The director, I can have a huge effect on the organization, but it's like a Grand Canyon effect. It's a very slow trickle down erosion effect. People don't realize it. Average first round pick takes 5 years to get to the NHL. Average first round pick takes 6 to 7 years to be a contributing player. Guys are doing it earlier and earlier, but you're still, if you take out the outliers, you're still looking at a 3 to 4 year period of just making the NHL. So when you do that, you're talking dog years. And when you talk about like the effect Ken can have immediately with trades, with free agents, with putting a coach in charge, again, Ken will have a giant effect on this team simply by who is coaching the team in October next year.
And I should say, by the way, we're recording this on the 28th, but by the time this airs, there may be a new coach.
Or there may not be.
Or there may not be.
As I said, Ken will decide which direction the team will go in. So Ken will have a profound effect just by choosing the coach. But as I said, it doesn't have anything to do with seniority. It has to do with position.
All right, I'm going to go to some fan questions. And before we get to them, I do want to say to those people who have reached out to me on various different platforms, if I don't ask your question, it's because of one of two things. Either we ran out of time, one of three things. We ran out of time, I thought it was a bad question, or you were mean to me and I don't like you. So it's just going to be as simple as that, because I got one person reached out to me, I didn't reply, and then they were like, good talk. And I was like, yeah, well, maybe be less snarky to me. So first things first, what's your favorite flavor of gelato?
I shouldn't say, I like ice cream.
Okay.
And I'll eat gelato because I like sweets. I'll eat gelato anywhere. If it's gelato, I'm basic. It's chocolate, but
first comment was chocolate and hazelnut.
No,
underrated.
There's nothing better than like Baskin Robbins mint chocolate chip ice cream, or
it has to be green though.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Okay,
but as I said, or that fancy place here has the white mint chocolate chip ice cream, but that's good too.
Sultan.
I don't know, whatever
down in Manhattan Beach,
wherever you're spending $14 or $15 for an ice cream, which is absolutely insane.
It's worth it,
but I don't know.
Once in a while.
If it's gelato, basic.
All right. So the next first.
I hope they're all this easy.
No. What qualities do the Kings scouting staff most look for in prospective players pre-draft? And has this philosophy significantly changed now with the hiring of Ken Holland? And there's some, we'll get to it. So just leave it at that for now.
So it's changed a little with Ken. And it's more because Ken has granted us, as he said before, a little bit of autonomy in terms of how we do things. It's funny. We just wrapped up our manager meetings an hour ago, and the first day alone was spent on. We have a hierarchy of what we look for. So I'm not going to say, but you can figure out the base tenets, right? Anytime you listen to anyone talk about hockey players, they talk about hockey sense, they talk about skill, they talk about skating, they talk about compete. Now you can break them down, and I said I think that's a lazy way of doing things, but that's the base, the floor from all the tributary. Hockey sense, you can have 20 different tributaries come out of hockey sense. Compete, you can have 10 different, you can use the Neanderthal traditionalist version of compete, like how much does he fight?
Do you play video games?
Sometimes.
If I asked you if you knew what a skill tree was.
I do. Okay. Yeah, I would. Yeah, especially when I was younger.
Is there anything like that?
Yeah, of course there is. Right. Of course there is. Like strength, but everyone would agree that the fruit of the rating tree or evaluation tree comes from those, if not a few more, but those would be in every staff's thing. So one of the things we spent, we did a couple of cool exercises on. I thought they were cool. The guys were mixed. Some thought they were, it was tough. It's hard to debate things like that you have core beliefs in and not get emotional and argue. And that's one of the things I worry about in a meeting is debate versus argument. And the more passion you have, the more debate tends to go towards argument. So we had some of those exercises and things, and the first one was based on, are these really the things we still value? You know, and again, it's like updating your Windows, or it's like taking your car in for service. Just are these things still working right? Are these still so? Is hockey sense still this? You know, like when we talk about hockey sense, are we still valuing X, Y, and Z? When we talk about speed, is it more important in the game than it was when we were valuing it here? Is it less important?
Can I ask you a real quick question about hockey sense? Sorry to interrupt. So I have been criticized for my takes on Connor McDavid, but I stand by them. And one of them is, it's great that he can turn around in the neutral zone, attack the offensive zone, and beat 4 defenders all by himself one-on-one. But he's the only guy who can do it. And that's not a good play. It's a good play for him because he can do it. But if I'm the coach and I see anybody else try it, I am apoplectic. I'm like, that is a terrible move. Is that good hockey sense to be able to do that? Or is that bad hockey sense but phenomenal physical ability?
So there are... As I said, the word generational player gets thrown around way too much. As I said, if you have 5 generational players, you're using the word incorrectly.
Sure.
But Connor McDavid is a generational player.
Yeah.
There's no he transcends for me. He transcends rate. There is no hockey sense that you know what Connor McDavid can do Connor McDavid things because he is not only innately better than everyone else, he's also worked to be better than everyone. You know, there's gifted guys, which we see a lot in the league, and then there's gifted guys who have a gifted level of drive, a gifted level of compete, a gifted level to achieve both personally and in a more team environment. And he is generational in all that. So it has nothing to do with Connor McDavid can go beat 4 guys because he can go beat 4 guys. There's no hockey sense involved because he can just do it. He also has hockey sense. But if he's beaten 4 guys, as I said, you just apply the skill to somebody else. So,
but I'm watching the Memorial Cup or even the Calder Cup playoffs, and I'm seeing guys take the puck in the offensive zone, and I don't know what they see. I feel like they must see something that convinces them that they can do something they can't. And then they can't. And I wonder, okay, is that a flaw in hockey sense? Or is that just a lack of ability? Because to see in order to capitalize on an opportunity, you first have to be able to identify it.
Well, there's it's not a one size fits all. So again, what you're going to see is younger players. The odds that a younger player has a more immature game and a more immature mind and a more immature processing thing, that's standard. The younger you are, very few people have a maturity at certain ages, and that applies to hockey and everything. So one thing is you'll see junior hockey players. Again, you get to pro, you're like, oh, he's doing junior hockey things. He's doing rookie things. You ever hear the term rookie mistakes? Well, rookie mistakes are junior mistakes, high school mistake, college mistakes, because you get away with them in junior. So when you're seeing a guy do that in junior hockey, one of 3 things happens. He's either dumb and he doesn't see, hey, there are guys in all levels of hockey that don't see it. And he's carrying the puck into traffic because he doesn't recognize that there aren't lanes there or that the lanes are closing off. Second thing is he thinks he can do it because he's done it once before. I have seen, again, we talk about Bruchevitz on the show. I've seen Bruchevitz go end to end, bring the puck to the net, get a scoring chance, and then be the first guy back and hit a guy in the corner, and then jump back up the ice and get a shot on net. Well, he's done that, so he thinks he can do it with regularity. And in junior hockey, he can do it with some regularity. But when he gets to the American League level, as you saw, Henry would do some things that would work, and sometimes those exact same things wouldn't work. And that's what makes, Drew Doughty, Dean and I had this conversation, Drew Doughty figured out the NHL in 5 shifts. He had 5 shifts where boom, I got it. I know what I can do. That's the rarity. That's the outlier. Some guys figure out pro hockey in a year. Some guys are in the American League for 2 years, bouncing up and down for 2. So there's a processing thing that could take you as little as 5 shifts and as long as 10 years. Now, you don't see the 5 shifts and you don't see the 10 years very long because guys don't last and guys don't have that brilliance. But the people in junior hockey are doing that because they've either gotten away with it or they don't get it. Or, I mean, some guys have that drive to win, right? Like, so Kelowna is a little overmatched in this Memorial Cup.
Yeah, they are.
Well, they are. As I said, they're a little overmatched in this Memorial Cup. They got one line. You got Shihar, who's really good. You got a Gilna, who's really good. And then you got a couple of other support players. So you'll start seeing a Gilna, even more so than Shihar. Shihar's game's a little more mature. A Gilna's game's more dynamic, certainly more goal-centric. In terms of production and creating offense, Tej would be higher. But you'll see, like, Tej particularly, he'll get in his mind, if I don't do it, we might not get it done. So then you have that third thing there where it's a drive. It's a, God, we got to win. We're down by 2. If I don't get this done, every time I pass it to X, it goes back in our net. Anytime I do, pass it here, it comes back. I got to do it myself. So there's also that third thing of just an absolute drive. Now it can be a drive to help the team, a selfish drive, but there's that drive that if I don't do it, nobody else will or can. So those are the 3 instances you'll see. And you don't see that as much in the NHL because there are consequences. If Drew Doughty stays out too long in junior hockey, or he doesn't back check, or he lets a guy go for a goal, or he loafs, the next power play, Drew Doughty's over the boards playing on the power play. If Tyler Toffoli, he's out in the power. If Tyler Toffoli didn't get the puck out in the wall one time in his first call up to LA, what happened? Bus back to Manchester. So consequences also will, so there's maturity, there's built-in consequences that you don't have at lower levels. So what you see at the AHL, NHL level, you see that far less because guys, A, figure it out, or B, know that if they do it, it's gonna have a repercussion.
Apologies to the person who asked that question. I kind of hijacked it there with the hockey sense question, but all right.
Did I answer the right question?
I think so. I think I cut in the middle of it, and we got. But the real question was: Does Ken Holland prioritize different qualities than previous?
Yes, he does.
Okay, and I'm assuming you won't tell us.
No, I won't.
Yeah, all right, that's fine. All right. The next question is: in NHL video games, a player's attributes are ranked, right? Like if you're creating a player, you've got speed, toughness, defense, whatever. Those attributes may consist of categories like speed, size, face-off, defensive awareness. Do NHL scouting staffs rank player attributes when comparing players? If so, who decides what are the top attributes the scouting staff should focus on?
So, I do, but in saying that, it's not a dictatorship. I get direction from Ken of how he wants to build. I get direction from Dean, how he wants to build a team, Rob Blake, how he wants to build a team, and Ken, how he wants to build a team. Ken has ideas of what you need to not only make the NHL, but to help the team win. So does every general manager in the league. So Ken would be the broadest of philosophies in terms of an amateur application. It would be a much more focused philosophy in terms of an NHL or a free agent or trade application. So Ken would give a broad outline of this because he wants me to understand, or he wants the amateurs to understand what he values, but he doesn't want to get us too narrow because it's not his primary area of focus. At one time coming up, he would have had a more amateur focus. And as you get higher up, it becomes more of a pro focus.
This is a totally unfair question. If I was to create a fake spectrum of Dean Lombardi and Rob Blake, where does Ken Holland fit on the spectrum between, like, who is he closer to between the two GMs? Because now you've worked under 3.
Ken's unique. Dean was unique. Rob,
the reason I ask is that
I just want to
Dean
answer.
Lombardi was the general manager, I was purely a fan. When Rob Blake was the general manager, I went from sort of hybrid to
it's hard
professional
in
the industry.
Rob Blake's a Hall of Fame winning Stanley Cup captain. Like for me,
sure.
Well, no, but again, it's hard for me. I'm not a hockey fan. I'm not a sports fan.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. I didn't grow up rooting for teams or anything like that. But I knew who Rob Blake was. So, like with Dean and Ken, I've known Dean only as an executive. He wasn't a player or anything. And even though Ken was a player, he wasn't Rob Blake, so I know Ken as an executive. So Rob Blake is a more hard guy for me to quantify in that spectrum, only because there's a. I said I'm not a fan, but there's still that still creeps into it.
A little starstruck, you mean?
Not starstruck, but this. I mean, again, how many Stanley Cup captain winners are there?
Is it the reason? So the reason I ask is that I feel like after 8 years, I had a pretty good handle on who Rob Blake was.
Absolutely.
As an executive.
I think
Dean Lombardi,
absolutely.
You and I were at the 2024.
I would say that Ken would slide closer to Rob.
Mm-hmm.
Dean is. I'm not a drinker, but I guess Scotch is an acquired taste.
Okay,
but you know what I mean. Like anybody who's had hard alcohol the first time, I don't know. I don't understand how anyone ever drank Scotch the second time.
It's performative. Let me just say.
Well, I don't know. I just
definitively.
As
someone who likes it,
I just don't understand how you got to the second time. Like I write my tongue on fire, and I'm not doing it again. So, but
that's why we like it.
So Dean, Dean is Scotch. Like your early interactions with Dean and subsequent ones are not always pleasant.
Okay.
And are, quite frankly, a lot of times unpleasant. However, it's by design, and the way you learn from Dean is by pushing through, by thinking a way around a situation that to avoid some unpleasantness. The levels you have to go to just to say hello to Dean. You know, you walk into a room and say, "Hey, how you doing, Dean? Do you really effing care?" That's the answer. Like, so if you're going to just say hello to Dean, you have to have a strategy. Now, if you say hello to Ken, how you? Oh, I'm doing great. I just got back. You know, there's a personality and a personableness and a warmth to Ken, and similarly to Rob. If you ask Rob how he's doing, oh, I'm doing good. My kid I was just on the ice with my kid. You know what I mean? There's a personal interaction with both of those guys. It doesn't mean one is better than the other, but in terms of on the spectrum, Ken would be closer to Rob, and it would be a more empathetic, interpersonal way of doing. And again, it would also transform into the job. You would have meetings that were less conflict oriented. You would have meetings that are more direct. A dean meeting, a dean meeting is when you put a nail and you crack the glass, and there's 5,000 things going off. So a dean meeting may start here and end here, but there's 500 different tributaries in the middle, whereas a Ken and a Rob meeting would be more, there'd be more discussion, more interaction, more back and forth, respectful interaction, more things like that. No one, I said some people do better in one style, some people do better, some people can do both. So I don't want to say that one's better than the other. As I said, I'm still learning with Ken, but the energy that he brings would probably be the biggest difference. It's just he's got this kind of infectious energy that kind of brings you up. Like when I find if I'm talking to Dean, I'm a little like this. Okay, and if I'm talking to Ken, I'm kind of leaning in. And then Rob would be a little bit lesser than that, but more on the Ken scale.
I want to get back to the ranking question, the attributes thing, because, and selfishly, I'm hijacking another question. So when player evaluations are made and the stats are ranked, speed is whatever and everything. Organizationally, I know that I don't know, but I suspect based on what we've heard members of the organization say out loud, that there's a premium put on face-off wins. But I know from talking to people in the analytics community that the current opinion is that face-offs are not that important, that they are one puck battle of hundreds of puck battles that take place during a game, but because they are isolated and highly visible and you can track them, they've sort of become this thing. The attitude I've taken is sort of they're important when they're important and they're not when they're not. How important are they when, if you've said before that if you take two guys who are equally same across the board, you might as well take the guy with the blue eyes. If you have two guys who are perfectly identical, but one is a winger, who never takes faceoffs, and one is a center who wins 51% of his faceoffs at, the CHL level. How valuable, how weighted is that attribute?
I don't know that I've ever. Well, first of all, the majority of centers drafted play wing. It's just simple supply and demand.
Mm-hmm.
You have 50 centers or 60 centers drafted a year. there's just, even if they all were good centers, there's good centers that are playing wing. So position matters, but I think sometimes things get, you'd rather have a natural center than a wing, but if he's not a top tier center, the chances are he's going to be a wing. In terms of face-offs or something like that, I don't know that I've ever. I know that it's been written in some reports because I've read reports where a guy said he's really good on face-offs. I can't think of an instance where I would have used face-offs to break a tie, do a rank, or anything like that. And again, problem with face-offs too is, well, the analytics people can't speak in a normal way to make the NHL executives understand what they're trying to say, and the NHL executives, for the most part, can't speak in a robotic way of, or just a purely non-emotional way to make, like, face-offs don't matter in the aggregate. Like, again, like, you have a player A is considered a very good face-off guy, and player B is considered a mediocre face-off guy. Over the course of the year, you're talking from a very good one to a mediocre one. You're talking about 20 face-offs in the course of a year. That's the difference. I mean, that's the difference. Like, so 20 face-offs in a year, no, that doesn't matter. However, when you lose a face-off in overtime, you cannot convince a coach that doesn't matter, because you lose possession of the puck, and we know how the 3-on-3 is played, that it doesn't necessarily come back right away. So the analytic answer is, well, just put guys on the ice that get the puck back. There are guys that win puck battles more. But again, those guys win puck battles at a rate, if you take it at the end of the year, is about 20 to 25. So, you're ranking these same two things that are similar, and you're putting hyper focus on face-offs because every play starts with a face-off. And you don't. So, it depends. Like, if you're not going to win the face-offs, you better have guys that go get the puck. And if you don't have guys that go get the puck, you better win the face-off. But it's such a small thing that gets hyper-focused just because you can quantify it. And face-offs happen, the first thing a game happens is a face-off. So it gets a level of artificial importance just that way. But, at the end of the year, they're very marginal differences.
So a lot of the questions that I get asked to ask you, I try to explain to people, like, part of the reason that people like John Hoven or I don't ask you questions is a lot of the times we think we know the answers. And if I don't think the answer is likely to be very good or interesting, or I think you're going to say, no, I'm not going to tell you, then I don't even ask. A lot of the times the question is, okay, well, that's not really his job. Like, if somebody asks, like somebody was like, what does he think about how the D-Corps is deployed? I'm like, well, that's not his job. I'm not going to ask it. Like, it wouldn't be appropriate to ask you. It wouldn't be appropriate for you to answer. So I'm not even going to get into it. But then there are questions like this next one, which is, I think it's an interesting question, but I can anticipate a potential answer, which is this might be overblown in fan eyes, but internally it might not be that uncommon. The question is, what made the organization rank Jack Hughes ahead of Lane Hutson? And the reason that it's that stunning is because there was 10 picks in between the two. And Jack Hughes doesn't get an entry-level contract, and Lane Hutson is obviously incredibly successful so far.
That one's easy.
Well, the next question then is, do misses like that cause you to reevaluate how you're approaching?
Well, I mean, the simple answer is Jack Hughes was rated ahead of Lane Hutson because undersized D that are not wide-bodied and don't defend well in junior can't make the NHL. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows that. And you know how I know everyone knows that? Because Jack Hughes was passed over 31 times and 31 times. So we know that Jack Hughes can't play because we have this warped traditionalist.
Lane Hutson, you mean?
I'm sorry. I'm Jack Hughes, and we know that Lane Hutson can't play because we know that small defensemen can't play, right? Until
To be clear, I think you're saying that sarcastically.
Of course it's
All right. I just want the people watching
well,
to
no,
understand.
because that's how dumb we are.
Right.
You know what I mean? A groupthink, traditionalism, misapplication of stimulus. As I said, we all know that he can't play with his deficiencies no matter how good he is. And it takes a cataclysmic. So again, for the amateur side, I would argue that that's a cataclysmic mistake for every team that didn't draft him. It's less of a mistake for Montreal because they could have drafted him and they didn't, but they drafted him. They recognized something that nobody else recognized. Whether you recognize it late or not, you still recognize it.
You mean they could have taken him in the first round?
Well, they could have taken him in the first round.
Right.
Like, again,
yeah.
So what happens is again, they took him, they won, they realized something that nobody else realized. And it takes a cataclysmic mistake like that. If he made the NHL, if Lane Hutson's Matt Grzelcyk, it's status quo. It's business as usual. Yeah, he can't play. We don't think he can make it. All right, we were wrong. He made it. It doesn't. You need a seismic mistake. Again, now then you have to do the work, right? First, you have to be you have to be able to admit you made a mistake, and I'll get in trouble. I would say that 50% of the league doesn't think they made a mistake on him. He's just the outlier. It just happened. It just happened. It just happened. Again, that's my take. Maybe I'm right. Maybe I'm wrong. I think the LA Kings made a mistake. I think the amateur staff on the LA Kings made a mistake. I think our area scouts made a mistake. And I think the biggest mistake of all was me. I saw him play. I liked him. I liked his stuff. God, he skates well. I liked every. If you look at my reports, and if you look at Gasparini's reports, and you look at Ted Lyle's reports, and if you don't put a name on it, like, this is a top 15 guy. This is a top 20 guy. This is a guy the LA Kings want to draft. But because we're idiots and we get blinded by what we know, we get blinded by tradition, as soon as you put the name on it, like, oh, well, he can't play. So now you have to start looking at all the Hudson-like guys that have made it. And again, there are more. When you start going under the hood, he's a bit of an outlier, but there are Hudson lights. There are Hudson adjacents. There's a Spurgeon. There's there's his brother Cole is a little bit bigger, but there are a lot of guys, and then you have to look, well, all this traditionalism in the NHL the same. Well, it's not the same. So is the expectation that more guys like Hudson more of these outliers are going to filter into the league, which will make them more of a norm. So you have to take a look at not only Hudson, you have to take a look at not only the practices that led you astray and the groupthink and the biases you may or may not have. Then you have to look at the game and say, is the game being played in such a manner that will facilitate more Hudsons coming in? I think so. Again, we had another one of these sarcastic things because one of the things you often hear is even if Hudson can play, you can only have one of them. Like, you hear that all the time, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, a small guy can play. You know what? You win. A small guy can play. But you can't have too many of them. And then you're like, well, that's obvious. You can't have too many of them. I mean, because if you had too many of them, you'd be Carolina. And we know they're not going to win. And if you had too many small guys on D, or
again, to be clear, sarcasm.
Yeah, sarcasm. Right. Well, then you're Montreal. So we know that as I said. So again, you have to. You said you have to keep taking in information. And again, I wish I had learned the lesson before the Hudson draft. I've learned some painful lessons along the way of things that you should and shouldn't do, going all the way back to our first draft. I hope that I'm constantly learning lessons, and I hope I'm learning lessons in time so that Hudsons don't happen, or if they happen, they're the rarity. But as I said, it's a complex thing of just one player. You have to, if you really want to make sure you don't make the mistake, because again, if Hudson is a once in a lifetime thing, and you go draft the next one at 30, now you've blown it twice. You missed it when it was there, and you overestimated that it's, so you have to, as I said, I am of the mind that I think that you're going to see more and more guys like that. I'm of the mind that you can win with more and more. Now, do I want to put a team of 5'10" players? No, but I also don't want to put a team of 6'7" knuckle draggers on the ice. The thing again, there's a reason Montreal went out and got a big guy like Dobson. There's a reason they have a guy like Shikai playing in their lineup. There's a reason that Carolina started to bring in a slightly different type of player over the last 2 or 3 years. They realized that their model's correct but not perfect. So you have to adapt. And again, I think it's starting to be proven in the NHL that you can win a variety of different ways if you have the right players at the right positions at the right sizes.
This one's from me because it's something I've been really curious about. When you're self-evaluating, I'm going to give you a couple names. You've got Jacob Middleton. If you're taking a guy like that your team drafted in the 7th round, who takes a while to develop, but finally does become the guy you see, versus a guy like Perreault or Snuggerud or Wallstedt, who you have your eye on, but you never even have the opportunity to get, are you evaluating your evaluation process the same? Like, is Middleton a hit because you had it right, even though you didn't have it right away? Are Snuggerud and Perreault right because even though you didn't get to take the pick, but you had it, but you knew you were right about what they could be? Like, how do you self-evaluate on situations that are out of your control?
Oh, they're two entirely different situations. So I go back over the drafts meticulously. You really have to wait 5 years, and you have a good idea, and then 6, you know it, and 7, you're rock solid. So when you start forensically auditing your own drafts and evaluating where you went right and wrong, it's fool's gold to try to do between years 1 and 4. And as I said, 5, 6, and 7, you're done. So if we had, so you brought up the names, who's Snuggerud and Perreault?
Yeah, Snuggerud and Perreault. Just because there were guys that were drafted in years you couldn't have taken them.
So we had Snuggerud on a position. I won't say where he was in our draft. He's still on the development curve. It looks like he's pretty good. It looks like he's going to be, I still think it's a shade early to be exactly right about him. But if we're talking about him, it appears that we had him in the right spot of our draft list, which means it's a good evaluation and the process and procedure was correct. Same with Perreault. I mean, it's still early. He finished on a real high note. He did have some struggles in the beginning of the year as a smaller guy adjusting to the pro game in the American League. It seemed to me he started to figure it out around January, and then he started to take off a little more, a little less linear and a little more of a exponential takeoff at the end, and he finished off with a hat trick towards the end of the year. As I said, it could still go either way, but based on where he was on our list and where I am projecting him to be, it seems like it's a good evaluation. The easier ones would be like, because I can talk about it much more now. We had Toffoli in the top 20 of our draft. We had Chernak in the top 20 of our draft. Even though Chernak played somewhere else and Toffoli played for us, they were both evaluated correctly. The procedure was right. It doesn't matter if Chernak is traded and Toffoli stays with us. The procedure's right. Middleton's a little more nuanced. Wayne Simmons was a guy we wanted to draft. I'm trying to like Matt Roy was a guy we wanted to draft. Mikey Anderson was a guy we wanted to draft. They're not Doughty. They're not Voynov. But there was a passion to draft Mikey Anderson in the draft. There was not a passion to draft Mikey Anderson in the 2nd round. But there was a passion to draft him. There was a passion to draft Matt Roy in the draft. There was not a passion to take Matt Roy in the 5th round. But if you saw the excitement level when guys talked about him in that area, you get a different feel for them. The odds that a 7th round pick is going to play us 200 games is about 2%.
I'm going to jump in. Sorry, real quick. You mentioned the 200 game metric because that's how. Where did that come from, and why is that so important?
So the 200 game metric is it's not arbitrary, but I don't think there's more nuance than that. The 200 game metric is the easiest metric to use. If you play 200 games, chances are if you play 200, you're going to play 400. Once you get to 200, things shift. You can use the 100-game metric. Again, I think that's too soft. What happens is when you get to 200 games, you start taking some of that duplicitous out. You start taking some of the agenda out, some of the directing of the things. So 200 games, as I said, 200 games you tend to get to 400, and 200 games you tend to get rid of all that fake white noise. So it's an easy standard to apply because it's a rock solid basic standard, and everybody can speak the same language and everybody can do it. So that's how the 200 games thing came in. I think the 200 games thing is one of the best ways to measure draft success after the second round.
Okay, because
there's nuance
likelihood drops out.
Well, as I said, if you're picking in the first round, there's an expectation. Now, some of it's inflated because the first round percentage is heavily influenced by the top 10 to 12 picks. It's 100% at 7, and it's 50 or 49 to 50% at 30. But if you're talking about the first round, if you get a 200-game player at 12, and that's it, I would consider it a failed pick. If you're going to draft someone, especially upper first round, but in the first round, you have to get a guy who produces in some fashion, a difference maker. It doesn't mean he has to put 100 points on the boards, but if you're going to get a defenseman, he's got to influence the game, whether it's transitionally, physically, whether it's on the power play. You have to get somebody who not only plays 200 games, he plays 400 games or whatnot, and he has an impact in your top 4.
I'm going to use some language that
Sure.
you and I have used in previous conversations, and that's the notion that draft picks are currency. So you have draft currency and NHL currency. But if you're using your draft currency to draft a player who only converts to NHL currency after your exclusive bargaining window is expired, so this is why I bring up Jacob Middleton, because good job out of the Kings scouting staff to correctly identify a player who would go on to become an NHL currency. But the NHL currency converted after it was of any value to the Kings.
He was a regular player before his contract rights would have been up.
Not for the Kings, he wasn't.
No, because the Kings made a mistake.
But I'm just saying, what is the value of that currency if it matures?
The value
doesn't
change. The fact that Jacob Middleton is I said in a lesser role, he's a difference maker in Minnesota. He's a 4.5. He's a guy that every team in the league would trade for right now. So his value hasn't changed. The value to the Kings was 0. But the value of Jacob Middleton is fixed. Jacob Middleton is X. He is now. It could have been misidentification. It could have been, there's a myriad of things, or it could have been just something like. Here's the other thing: does Nick Dowd become the best? At one time, you would argue he was the top C4 in the league for maybe a 2-year period. Mm-hmm. Does Nick Dowd become that player if he isn't released by the Kings and Vancouver, or not released but traded by the Kings and Vancouver? Or does he still find that middling level of his potential? You know what I mean? Sometimes you need to hit rock bottom or sometimes you need some kind of catalyst for change. So if we kept Middleton, would he have ever turned into? Now, I tend to think that guys will find a way, but I said the value of Eric Chernak is a little more quantifiable because you were able to trade him for Ben Bishop. I don't think anyone's thinking that was a good trade by any means, but you can at least quantify that Chernak got you Bishop. But Chernak's value is still his value independent of Bishop. Chernak's value is, again, it's X, it's Y. He's a top 4D. He's a skater, and he's a heavy guy who can impact the game physically, and if he needs to fight, he's a guy that everyone wants. So there's even an abstract value you can apply to him. But in terms of drafting, unless you have complete control from day 1 to day 2, as I said, and again, the same thing would apply to development. Development, gets like drafting. You can get the blame for drafting when you drafted the right guy and he was misdeveloped. You can get the blame for drafting when you didn't want that guy and he was drafted or whatever. It happens all the time. Dean happened with Tubert. I said, I don't mind talking about this because he's come out in multiple publications saying, I overruled the guys. So you can do that. But you can draft the wrong guy and he can be developed because you have a superior development staff. And now all of a sudden, the drafting team, or me in this situation.
Is there an example in Kings history that you can talk about where it was the wrong guy but was developed into a good player?
How about not the wrong guy? Because if he's developed into a good player, he's not the wrong. But I can tell you multiple situations where if Dwight King was drafted by another organization, I don't know that he would have made the NHL. If Alec Martinez was drafted by another team, he would have made the NHL, but he wouldn't have. I don't know that he would have been special. Like some of these guys had champions in our development staff. I can talk about these guys because it's older.
Sure.
It's older. There's certainly instances now that I wouldn't be as comfortable talking about. So it's easy. Matt Roy was going to make the NHL no matter what. Mikey Anderson, they were later picks, and the development staff pushed them on their way. But they're going to make it as later picks. They're going to make it regardless. Does Nick Dowd get there without the development staff? There's so many guys that the development staff influence. But as I said, I'm not. Dwight King is strictly because Dwight King is a special individual, and the development staff was a special staff. So. Nobody talks about how the development staff, as I said, like Dwight King's a huge success for the amateur scouting staff. And every once in a while you might hear a development name here or there, in the footnote of history. Like when they had maybe a more profound effect than we as an amateur staff had. So part of the thing is there's so many things that go on between the draft and the finished product that that often the success gets assigned incorrectly. I mean, again, it's like it takes a village. Like there's so much that goes on. And as I said, I don't ascribe to the fact that Middleton has the fact is you drafted a guy who's you die to get today.
By the way, not just a 7th round pick, but the last
pick of the draft
in the 7th round.
But I said he's as I said there's but again for each Middleton there's a Jacob Friend. And it's funny. It's you can't, as I said, you there's so much going on that it's hard to really quantify everything. It's if you draft the guy and he makes it, right or wrong, the amateur staff gets credit. If you draft the guy and he doesn't make it, right or wrong, the amateur staff gets credit. And there's a lot of people who don't get the credit they should get for helping guys make it, and there's a lot of times that mistakes are unavoidable. Dean used to have us, I said, and Rob too, who did you miss in the draft? Like I said, we go back over the list. I go back over the list. I'm like, oh, we missed Hudson. Okay, you know what? First thing I do is I go back and watch it. I'm like, oh, geez, is he good? Like, wow, how did I not see this? And then I'll watch it with Teddy or I'll watch it with someone else. Okay, where do we miss here? But there are an equal amount of times I go back and watch a guy that we had wrong, and he was awful. And I'm like, okay. And I watched 12, 15 games of him, and he just wasn't good then. Like Pearson. Nobody missed Pearson his draft year. Nobody missed him. And nobody missed him his draft year +1. No, I went back and I watched it. We drafted Pearson. He's a great success story for us. We, based on hindsight, if I had all that information and I could watch, he wasn't good enough. He didn't do enough to get drafted his first year, and I don't think anyone missed him. And he didn't do it his second year. Now, something happened between his second year and his third year where he exploded. Maybe it was the fact that he realized this is my last chance, And so again, with with hindsight and everything, I go back and watch Pearson and I realize there was no mistake made in procedure. It's just one of those situations where the guy got better. And then there's the situation with Hudson where you're like, ooh, okay, we misevaluated this. We over-criticized this. And then you learn from it. So as I said, there's times in drafting where you didn't miss, and there's times in drafting where you did miss. And you have to be able to be honest with yourself to know the difference.
We've gone a long time, and I don't want this to. I would talk to you all afternoon.
Whatever you guys want. I've taken the red eye tonight, so it's up to you.
But I'm going to keep it to two questions,
Sure.
and I'm going to transition into the next one based on the conversation about Tanner Pearson. So Dev Camp will be immediately following the draft.
Mm-hmm.
There will be players at Dev Camp who were not drafted. There always
Yes.
are. And every year at training camp, there are players who went undrafted
Absolutely.
who are invitees, whether they're collegiate players that are too old or they're just whatever. Who's in charge of scouting those players? Is that your department as
You
well?
mean bring them to camp or
just
scouting them once a year?
identifying them, paying attention to them, having you presumably there's a roster of names that you reach out to invite to fill out a roster.
No, it's the amateur staff. It could be every once in a while a dev guy will be with one of our players and he'll say, hey, I was watching Jimmy Lombardi play and player X looked really good to me. Oh yeah, Brian's seen him. You know what? We'll focus a little on him just in case, because again, they're watching so many hundreds and thousands of players a year. There's various ways it gets to us, but the scouting staff will draft the players and they go automatically, and then we'll have a list of guys. Often we have guys signed to development camp before the draft ends, because a lot of teams are going after some similar players. And then there's some situations we drafted Nick Ebert in the 7th and didn't draft Curtis McDermott because we thought that Ebert was going to get drafted and we didn't think McDermott was. So we gambled, and we actually had McDermott's name on our camp agreement at the end of the 6th round. Like, you can't file it yet, but he had agreed to camp with us. He had agreed to come, and then once he did not,
so you didn't need to draft him, but essentially you did.
Well, so as I said, like if he gets drafted,
sure,
there's egg on your face,
right?
You know what I mean? And that has happened at times. It's moving up and down in the draft. There's times you didn't move and you lost the guy you thought you were going to get, so that can happen. But the McDermott thing is, like, we didn't think he was going to get drafted. We said, called his agent, and we knew we had a relationship with Curtis anyway. Said, if you don't get drafted, we want to extend a camp invite to you right now before anyone. And he said, if I don't get drafted, I'll accept your invitation. The draft ends. We had already had conversation with him. The draft ends. 5 minutes after the draft, you send him the paperwork to come to camp, and he's there, and then you sign him in July. And now he's yours. Martin Jones was a little different case, but he was identified as the guy we'd want to bring to camp. As soon as the draft was over, we called Martin Jones, got his name on a tryout agreement, and then in September, he signed.
Final question before we wrap this up, and as always, appreciate your time. I'm going to use Curtis McDermott and Lane Hudson as polar opposites on this.
Yeah, they're fairly different.
Yeah. So the question is, how does the scouting staff project future size of players, and how important is that overall? And the reason I bring up McDermott and Lane Hudson is we talked about the CHL. You said, the oldest guy on a CHL team could be 3 years younger than a guy on an NCAA team. If you're scouting players who are still teenagers versus guys that are young men, it's a weird thing, right? Because the difference between a 16-year-old and a 22-year-old could be monumental. You're trying to project how they are as how they're going to develop as players. You're trying to project how they develop as personalities, but there's also probably some gamesmanship as far as like how they develop physically. How difficult is that? How important is that?
Oh, it's important. Again, it's very easy on the Curtis McDermott scale.
Sure, he was probably
That's
always
easy.
huge.
It's easy on a Jared Woolley scale. He's not near, but he's going to be a monster. Brushevitz, he's going to be not a monster, but he's going to be a horse. He's going to be wide. But it's harder with Nick Dowd, who by the time he graduated college looked like he was almost ready to shave. So you do it a couple ways, right? Like Hudson, we were pretty sure Hudson was going to be what he was. Now, is he going to gain 10 pounds? Yeah, because he's going to mature. But he's going to be small, and he is small. So what you do is you look at a guy, and again with Central Scouting, we do have measuring points. So at 14 years old, he was 5'6". At 15-year-old, he was 5'7.5". At 16-year-old, he was 5'9". At 17, he's 5'10.5". Well, now you look at him, he's grown incrementally each year, and he's young looking. Okay, he's going to be in that 6 to 6'1" range, But a guy's 5'8" at 16, 5'8" at 17, he's probably going to be 5'8" at 19. So it's an inexact science, but you do have some of the history. Some of the scouts will make note of it. And then again, you're sitting there at the combine. You're looking at him. Does he look young? Is he shaving? Is his neck thin? Are his shoulders, is his frame narrow? It's inexact. Some guys love to say, well, his mom and dad are 6'4", his brother's 6'4". You could take all that information in. Do I think that who's small in this year's draft? Do I think that Tom Belisle is going to be 6'4" from Moncton? No, But again, it matters for Curtis McDermott to be 6'4". It doesn't matter for Lane Hudson to be 6'4".
How much cooking of the books is there on height? I've spent a lot of time in and out of hospitals over the last year, only to discover, much to my chagrin, that I'm not 5'10", which is what I've been telling people for decades and is on my driver's license. I'm actually 5'8" or 5'9", depending on the day. There are a number of guys on the LA Kings roster who are listed at 6 foot or 6'1", and when I'm standing next to them in the locker room, now granted they're barefoot and I'm in shoes, but I'm taller than them.
If they're at the combine, you know their height.
100%?
Yeah, if they're at the combine, you know
right.
their height. As I said, they're not grabbing a knife on the wall by the door and
Sure.
and putting a marker there. If they're at the combine, you know their height. If they're not invited to the combine, you can do their height. You can do, but you have to go do it yourself. If you rely on an independent, it's not an indictment of them, but if you go on Hockey DB or Elite Prospects or whatever thing you want, there's much less certainty that those are the real heights. But as I said, you can either do it yourself, in legal, because there's certain things you're allowed to do with prospects and certain things you're not allowed to do, or you go to the combine. And as I said, I can't think of an instance that's happened. Like if a kid sits down in front of me and Central's got him at 6 feet, he's usually right around 6 feet.
All right.
If he's, I've rarely seen a guy that's Central listed at 6'1" sit down in front of me and have to be looking over to see it on a phone book. So,
has there ever been a player that you drafted where you anticipated a physical growth and his success path was negatively impacted by a failure for that player to just get bigger?
Well, you've already spoken about him today, and it's not a failure yet. He's exceeded my expectations, which is this year. Jack Hughes is the same size and weight today that he was his draft. I think he might be 4 or 5 pounds different. I would have thought that Madden was another guy.
Yeah,
Madden's another guy. We didn't draft him. We traded for him when he was in college, a junior in college. I would have thought that both of those guys would have been. And again, Hughes is still young, and you look at him; he's still young. He could still gain some weight. But Madden, I don't know that he gained 6 pounds.
I felt really bad for Tyler Madden because every time I'd go to Ontario and talk to him, he seemed like a really great kid.
Great player, too.
Really enthusiastic, really into it, but just slight. And not his fault.
He worked at it. He just, as I said, those are two guys that, like we used to say, geez, because Madden looked young.
Yeah.
Like he's second in NCAA in scoring. He's got talent. He's got hands. He's got sense. He can skate. Like, wait 3 years when this guy's 185 pounds. Think of what this guy's going to be, and then he's 160 pounds in 3 years. So yeah, there's plenty of guys that happens with. As I said, it's in we can guesstimate. We can but it's there's some reading runes, going on faith, looking at the stars that just doesn't pan out sometimes.
Mark Yannetti, thank you so much for your time. I could and probably will bore you with all sorts of dumb questions once the cameras stop rolling, but I want to let people go on with their day, including you. So thank you for joining me.
Sure, awesome. Had fun.
Thanks for watching, Kings fans. We'll talk to you soon.